This is Elizabeth Creamer. I'm with you today to give you an overview, a preview, sort of a bird's eye view of the first chapter of my book, An Introduction to Fully Integrated Mixed Methods Research. I don't intend this to fully summarize the major points of the book, but just to give you an idea of some of the issues addressed in the chapter. If you wanted more thorough and complete PowerPoints, which essentially are an outline of the entire chapter, then I recommend that you go to the SAGE site. After you purchase the text, those are available to you for free. So what I hope to do in this first chapter is fundamentally give you an idea of the definition of mixed methods research and to distinguish it from multi-methods research. I want to touch briefly on data about the prevalence of mixed methods in publications in top-tier journals. And I also want to acknowledge some of the objections that are raised about mixed methods research by some scholars. So let me tell you just a little bit about me. This is two views of me. The one on the right, I'm in Osaka, Japan, never been to Japan before, with some reps from the UK office of SAGE holding my book, which was just published in April of 2017. I'm now what you would describe as a research methodologist, social scientist trained as a research methodologist. And when you talk about a methodologist, it's different than a content person. I used to be a content person, and my content used to be gender and STEM, science, technology, and engineering, involving both faculty and students. But since about 1995, I've gotten really interested in research methods. So I write about research methods. I'm interested in methods more than content, and they cross content. I recently retired from tech after 36 years as a full-time employee, and I was actually a student there in 1978, which is where I got my doctorate. I've been teaching graduate level courses in both mixed methods and qualitative research since the early 90s. That's my strength, so I think I bring kind of a qualitative orientation to mixed methods, which is different from the two other introductory textbooks to mixed methods research. So let me talk about the standard and by far the most widely used definition of mixed methods research, which is the one by Creswell and Plano-Clark. They define it as both a method and a methodology, with the method being sort of data collection and analysis procedures, and a methodology being a logic of inquiry. And they say that it is a mixture of qualitative and quantitative approaches in many phases of the research process. And they emphasize this issue of mixing. So you see the word mixing here and mixing here. My definition of mixed method research is a little bit different. It's evolving. People do emphasize different things in their definitions, even though there's core concepts which everyone agrees on. Mine really emphasizes this issue of the intention to engage multiple perspectives. So I call it a systematic research approach to data collection and analysis that combines qualitative and quantitative data and analytic procedures with the intention to engage multiple perspectives in order to more fully understand a complex social phenomenon. Complex social phenomenon are whenever research involves people in an environment, or it could be animals in an environment, but there's more than one level of concern. It's not just the individual, it's an individual and an environment, whether that environment is education or medical or something different than that. There are controversial and non-controversial elements of the definition of mixed methods research. What is totally not controversial is that it requires both qual and quant data. What is also not controversial is the issue about mixing. So in anyone's definition, no matter what words they talk about, they emphasize the importance that those two are integrated in some way, if only at the conclusion stage. What is debated, and will perhaps forever be debated, is the issue you noticed in the Creswell-Plano-Clark definition. They say it's in one study, one published study. So to be mixed methods, the publication itself or the product of it has to be framed within a single publication. I kind of view it a little bit more broadly in that a project could be conceived mixed methods, but the publications may have a qual and a quant, and as long as you can refer to the broader conceptualization, I'm happy with that. I'm also willing to say that 2 qual, 3 qual, 4 qual can be mixed methods under certain circumstances. So I waver a little bit, or I'm a little bit more flexible on this idea that it must be a quant, which is generally considered to be a number, and a qual, which at a very simple level is words and numbers. Since words can easily be converted to numbers, then I think that's a rationale for why 2 quals under some circumstances can be mixed methods. Again, re-emphasizing this point, one thing no one disagrees about is that there must be some type of mixing, some type of integration of the qual and the quant. There are different ways to do it. Most often it's done at conclusions, but without that, you really do better to use the label multi-method. I really emphasize, and I join Jennifer Green in her wonderful 2007 point of view. I emphasize the logic of inquiry, which is a methodological part of mixed methods. And I really resonate with what she describes as a mixed method way of thinking as the principal reason for doing mixed methods. She calls that a commitment to engage complexity and to consider multiple points of view. Also, to engage multiple ways of knowing. That qual is one way of knowing, quant is another way of knowing, and that you're intentional about the engaging of those different perspectives, realizing that when you do that, it often introduces paradox. And the beautiful thing about paradox is even though we'd like the world to be simple, it often signals complexity, and it often leads to brand new insight, which I think is really, really crucial. So when you embed this mixed method way of thinking, it's the philosophical or logic that you're really emphasizing rather than a set of procedures that one might go through, such as in regression or something like that. If we talk a little bit about the prevalence of mixed methods as evident in what is published in top-tier journals, Elise and Tedley collected some very interesting data, and actually this was from Elise's dissertation, and this is an article published in the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, the flagship journal in mixed methods in 2010. Mixed methods is used much more widely in applied fields than non-applied theoretical fields. So applied fields are like education, like nursing and evaluation, where there is a great interest in impacting practice. I would say much research in agricultural education, in engineering education, all of education, the interest is in improving teaching and improving learning. When you look over these flagship journals, it's pretty, to me, it's not surprising because these numbers are pretty consistent, that 34% of the published articles now, these are top-tier journals, are in mixed methods. About a quarter are qual only, and 42% are quant only. If you look at data across time, the biggest change is not in this that you might expect, but it's in the quant-only numbers, publications that are quant-only. And there are a couple of reasons for that. I actually don't think that the amount of quant research has eroded that much, but that much of quant research is now really, or a significant portion is now really appearing as mixed methods research. But the bottom line is many people come up with a very similar number to this, saying slightly more than a third of publications, even in top-tier journals, are mixed methods research. So don't let anyone tell you that this is a rare thing. I think there are a lot of reasons for what people categorize as the explosive growth of mixed methods since it's really started to come to life in the 80s, and it really was first widely practiced in evaluation before it became its own tradition or field, or it's now recognized as a third major type of method. I think the biggest reason for that is the growth of interdisciplinarity. And I think the reason for the growth of interdisciplinarity is that the complexity of the problems being studied require multiple disciplines. Now, interdisciplinary does not mean that the disciplines are not important. It just means that it takes multiple disciplines or content area knowledges to understand many of the complex problems that are now being studied. Complex problems being poverty, climate change, obesity, prevalence of diseases. This requires many disciplines to understand and is a challenge in itself. I think you also see the growth of big data. Big data is simply the fact that every time you type something in the internet, you probably already know if you type a query, what explains my stomach ache? They're tracking it, they're tracking that, and they have millions and tetramillions of data points. This is happening on many fronts, and it makes some of the old sample size expectations irrelevant. We're talking about sample sizes that way exceed anything that was around when I was first doing research. I think there is also the increased sophistication of software, particularly I'm thinking qualitative software, and the growth of machine learning, where qualitative software can now be taught to code certain simple phrases. That gives some qualitative researchers the case of the nerves, but it opens up the ability to, for example, examine huge internet sites, newspaper sites, archives of all kinds. I think we also see that the enhanced awareness of the contribution of qual research, particularly in the medical and health fields, has also contributed to the growth of mixed methods. And a big one for the shift in quant is that some funding agencies, most notably NIH, now require that you use mixed methods research. So I think a lot of what used to only be quant because of this requirement has now become mixed methods. Throughout my book, one of the things that distinguishes it is that I use the metaphor of an arch as a visualization of mixed methods research, with one arm of the arch being qual, another arm being quant, and their integration, this keystone up here, being what they call a MetaInference. An arch is constructed one arm at a time, and then the keystone is dropped in, and it's the keystone that holds the whole thing together, not the building around it. So the keystone is the integration. So I see this as a good basic way to conceptualize mixed methods research. It's got a strong quant arm, it's got a strong qual arm, and somehow those two are linked. Historically, that has traditionally been in the conclusion phase. I love the metaphor of the MetaInference. I took this picture this summer when, being a Francophile, I was traveling in France. This is a Roman arch, or what's left of a Roman arch, which means it's withstood some serious time. And here is an example of a keystone, which the keystones serve both an aesthetic purpose. They can be beautiful, and if you're thinking about your conclusions, they can be lasting. But that's the thing that brings the two arms together. You see these keystones in many places, but not all arches have such a visible keystone. In the book, I use the phrase fully integrated mixed methods research. I didn't create that phrase. Tedley and Tasha Corey first created it in their introductory textbook, which is very, very quant-oriented, but toward the end of the book, they use that phrase, and I kind of built on that idea. A fully integrated study really embodies that mixed method logic of inquiry. You see the intent to mixing in the research questions. You see it in that both qual and quant data are collected. You see it in the analysis stage with analysis that uses both qual and quant data, and you see it in the conclusion. But that's only in fully integrated. Does every study have to be fully integrated? Absolutely not. In fact, I think probably only 1 or 2% of mixed method studies right now are fully integrated. It's more an ideal than a reality, but it's one that I illustrate with many, many examples in my book. As contrasted to the arch, I use the two separate columns to integrate what is either called multi-method, or which Tasha Corey and Tedley call quasi-mixed methods research. I think it's better to call it multi-method research. I think it's more transparent to research. A lot of researchers use multiple sources of data and never really intend to integrate them in any way. The column represents that. The idea of multi-method communicates we use many ways of collecting data. We probably collected them separately. We analyzed them separately. They're related, but they contribute to a wider story, but we had no intent to really integrate them, or the way we ended up reporting doesn't integrate them. And then I think you're more transparent with your reader if you use the multi-method label, even though some people sort of use it synonymously. And this is really about being upfront and transparent with your reader about what you're trying to tell them. When you use the mixed methods label, you're saying to the reader, hey, I am serious. Integration is a big part of trying to understand my findings. In this sort of model, it's not about integration. It is about multiple sources of data, but it's not about integration. I had a colleague for a long time who still refers to mixed methods as mixed up methods. Many, many students report negative feedback from people, advisors trained in the 80s about the idea or the potential for a graduate student to do a mixed methods dissertation. I, of course, am not in that camp. I have a much more flexible sort of view to things. My textbook includes many examples that came out of mixed methods dissertations, so I'm not in the camp that thinks it's unrealistic. Some people do believe that it is paradigmatically inconsistent and impossible to mix the two, because the assumption is the logic is so different. The logic is different. I don't deny that, and I think it's important not to erase those differences. But often when you present, you will have a question, inevitably have a question about the idea that it's paradigmatically incompatible to mix the two. And certainly it's important to acknowledge that some people feel very strongly about that. Let me end in a little lighthearted way. I maintain a web page. Here's the URL to it. It's called Mixed Methods Research. It's actually Mixed Methods Research in the news, but you can get to it through this link. And in it, I just post things I hear through podcasts and I see in the newspaper, which may never have been called mixed methods research, but which required mixed methods research. I have some examples of those in the text. For example, there is one study in there asking the question, why do birds have such different size and color of eggs? And I thought that was really a mixed method study. So on this website, you'll see some of my quirky interests and how I really have a broad range of interest. I hope I see you or feel your presence in future future videos about the remaining chapters in the book.